report any day now, and that could have a big impact on the future of the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, another battle is apparently in full swing between number 10 and number 11 over what to do about the cost of living crisis, whether there should be a windfall tax and what to spend it on. We'll find out what we can with our guests this morning. So, on the programme today, we'll be joined by the Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, who'll be here in the studio with us. With Labour focusing on the cost of living, we'll also be joined by the party's Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden. This week, I've been speaking to the former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, about reducing avoidable deaths in the NHS, a windfall tax, and whether he'd fancy another crack at the top job. We'll also be talking live to the Ukrainian MP Lisa Yasko to find out the situation there and if there's any hope for a negotiated end to the war. Plus, following a daring escape from Russia, the Pussy Riot activist Shtein is on the country's wanted list. I spoke to her as she takes refuge in Lithuania and raises money for Ukrainian refugees. Hello, good morning. So we're expecting that report from Sue Gray early next week, and it means the Prime Minister is going to be facing more uncomfortable questions about what happened at number 10 and the culture that he presided over. There are, of course, also big questions over the government's response to the cost of living crisis, with fresh measures from the Chancellor expected soon. Well, I'm pleased to say that this morning we are joined by the Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi. Thank you very much for being on the programme with us. Lots to get through, education, cost of living. But I do just want to start with Sue Gray and this meeting that was apparently held between Sue Gray and between the Prime Minister. Who called that meeting?
So, two things to say on that. One, I don't know the details of all the meetings that happened number 10, but what I do know is that the Prime Minister has never intervened in the investigation that Sue Gray conducted. He has always wanted her to go wherever the evidence takes her. I've worked with Sue Gray. I've known Sue Gray. I know she has the highest level of professionalism, and her integrity is unquestionable. She didn't pull her punches in her first report, you remember, and then the PM came to Parliament, made the changes, in fact, in number 10, because her report was critical of the way number 10 was operating, and the Prime Minister made wholesale changes in number 10. And, of course, she will decide when to publish her report, and the Prime Minister will respond to that as well. The important thing to remember, in my view, is, Sue Gray's been able to go wherever the evidence takes her and will decide how she publishes, what she publishes in her report.
It's a really, really simple question. And obviously you're not going to be across every single meeting in number 10. But this is a meeting that has been in the press since Sky News broke it on Friday night. So it would be, I think, fair of us to assume that you will have asked a bit of this to number 10 when you know that you're going to go and be their spokesperson this morning. The reason I'm asking who called the meeting is because initially journalists were briefed that it was Sue Gray. Her spokesperson then had to come out and basically push back on that to say it wasn't true, that she didn't initiate this meeting. So who did call the meeting?
Look, all I can say to you is the meeting that took place between Sue Gray and the Prime Minister, I can't tell you who called the meeting because
so why did you not ask the question of number 10 before you came on this morning, or did they just not tell you the answer?
No, I tell you what the answer is. The answer is very simple. The answer is the Prime Minister will never intervene in Sue Gray's investigation. The Prime Minister wants Sue Gray to basically go wherever the evidence takes her. And I don't think, ultimately...
Who called the meeting?
Well...
You say you don't know, but
do
you not know who called the meeting because you didn't ask the question or because number 10 didn't tell you the answer?
No, but if Sue Gray decides that, when she publishes, she decides, how she's going to deliver her final report.
That's a completely different question.
But what I'm saying to you is, ultimately, there are two facts that your viewers need to know. One, the Prime Minister did not, would never intervene in this report. He wants Sue Gray to publish her report. Secondly, I've worked with Sue Gray. I know Sue Gray. Sue Gray's integrity is beyond question.
So you're asking our viewers to accept that the Prime Minister did not intervene in this report, right?
Absolutely right.
Okay.
Absolutely right. And by the way,
I just feel that most of our viewers would have more confidence in that assertion if Number 10 could be straight with them about who called this meeting. And they're not being straight. Who called the meeting?
Well, hold on a second. You know that Sue Gray's first report didn't pull its punches.
But who called the meeting?
You know that the Prime Minister would never intervene in such an investigation, has not intervened, has allowed it to happen. Sue Gray's... You can't question Sue Gray's integrity because I've worked with Sue Gray...
I'm absolutely not questioning her integrity. I'm
her
asking a very, very simple, factual question.
As I will. One, I don't know. Two, I don't know what's in the report, right? None of us know what's in the report. Sue Gray will decide when to publish it, and it will be published. That's the important thing, and then the Prime Minister will respond to it. You know, we're getting into... There are meetings happen every day. My diary is full of meetings. You can ask me a question, who put this meeting in your diary? I literally would have come on your show and said, I don't know, but it went in the diary because someone in my team would have thought this is the right thing to do, right? You're sort of creating this air of
I'm absolutely not. Can I just say?
Doubt around this.
I'm not creating any air of doubt.
Not there.
The people who are creating the air of doubt is Number 10, because there is not a straight answer to a very, very straightforward question. Who called the meeting? That's literal. Look, I don't want to have to keep asking the same question.
I've just said to you,
going round.
Literally, tens of meetings go into the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State's diary. We can have the same conversation about a meeting that's in my diary. So how did that meeting get in your diary? I don't know, because that's the honest answer.
You're saying the honest answer is that Number 10 literally has forgotten who arranged a meeting between Sue Gray, who was publishing an explosive report, potentially, into the Prime Minister and law-breaking Number 10. And you were really asking us to believe that Number 10, they just actually don't know how that meeting got in the diary.
I'm saying to you that what's important, what is material to your viewers, is that Sue Gray has conducted her report independently. The Prime Minister has never, ever intervened in her report. That Sue Gray's integrity and professionalism is beyond doubt. You just said to me you agree with that. That is what your viewers should be concerned about.
I said I wasn't questioning that. I said I was asking the question,
you're saying
who called the meeting?
No, you opened your question just now by saying, do you really expect my viewers to have confidence, right, if Number 10 can't say who actually put the meeting in the diary? I'm saying to you, you can't doubt Sue Gray's integrity or professionalism. You say, of course I'm not doubting it, but then you go back to the same question. Therefore, you are casting doubt over it. So let's at least have an honest conversation here about this. I'm saying to you, I don't know what's in the report. No one knows until Sue Gray decides to publish it. That's the right thing, because actually she's done this and done it properly. She hasn't pulled her punches on the first report, and I'm certain she won't be pulling her punches on the second. If I know Sue Gray, she will deliver that report independent.
With respect, I'm asking a very, very straightforward question about who called a meeting between Sue Gray and the Prime Minister. That's literally all I'm asking.
Yeah, and I've just said to you, right, I don't know who called the meeting. What I do know is the Prime Minister doesn't and never would intervene in an independent inquiry.
Okay.
Sue Gray's professionalism is beyond doubt. Meetings go in my diary, where if I come on here, you say to me, how did this meeting get in? I would have to tell you the honest truth is I don't know. One of my officials would have probably put it in the diary. So let's not sort of create this sort of air of doubt around a process that has been absolutely robust and rigorous. That's all I'm saying.
What was discussed at the meeting?
I don't know. I've just said to you, I don't know. But all I would say to you is Sue Gray knows that her report has to be independent, has to be professional, and I have no doubt. Look at the first report. Right? She didn't pull her punches on the first report.
You've said numerous times that the Prime Minister didn't intervene. How do you know that if you don't know what was discussed at the meeting?
Because I know the Prime Minister has been determined from day one, and he shared that with me, with other ministers, and of course the country, that he would have Sue Gray conduct her report independently. He would never intervene or in any way try and influence that report. And that is what Sue Gray has done and will publish. And then the Prime Minister will respond to it afterwards. I don't know what's in the report, right? We will find out when it's published.
What reason do you think the Prime Minister could have for calling a meeting, or having a meeting, I should say, we don't know who called it, for having a meeting with Sue Gray before the report was published?
So, back to what I'm saying to you, if a meeting's gone in the diary for Sue Gray and the Prime Minister to meet, I guarantee you it's not because the Prime Minister wants to influence the report. If Sue Gray meets the Prime Minister, as civil servants do.
How can you give that guarantee if you don't know what the meeting was about?
Because I have no doubt of Sue Gray's professionalism and integrity.
Because you have faith in Sue Gray?
100%. Absolutely. I've known Sue Gray. I've worked with Sue Gray. There is no way she would allow herself to be influenced by anybody.
Do you have faith in the Prime Minister as well for not influencing the report?
Absolutely, very much. Look at the way he dealt with it in her first report. I'm sure you'd agree with me. Sue Gray did not pull her punches in the first report. What the Prime Minister did do, he didn't make any excuses. He put his hand up and said, we've got a problem, we've got to sort out number 10, and he went forward and actually made the changes in number 10, brought Steve Barclay in to be Chief of Staff, brought David Canzini into the team, made other changes. Andrew Griffiths came in to do policy. Big changes in number 10 that are delivering real outcomes for your viewers, including on National Tutoring Programme, which is on the front page of one of the Nationals today, 1.2 million blocks of tutoring for children to make their recovery, 6 million by the end of this Parliament. Of course, the cost of living that we are dealing with, a global battle against inflation, 22 billion in the next 12 months, that's helping people, and the Chancellor's reviewing what more we can do as we see more of the data coming in on the global battle against inflation, which the US is battling and the Europeans are battling. A big agenda in this government, 38 bills in the Queen's speech. We're delivering against that. We've got a schools bill, which is going to mean every child will have a great education wherever they live, with a great teacher in a classroom at the right time and the right place for them. That's what we're focusing on.
Let's talk about the cost of living crisis then. The Sunday Times reporting today that Rishi Sunak is planning a windfall tax on energy companies, which could mean that they get lower rates if they increase investment. Is that something that you would support?
So we will look at all the options, and I, with the Chancellor and the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, will look at every option. Let's just think about the question of investment. So if you take what Shell are planning to do, £25 billion of investment in renewables and green, BP, 20 billion. They both already pay double the corporation tax. The corporation tax is 40% compared to what other sectors of the economy pay. It's not a zero-cost option. Why do I say that? Because if you apply a windfall tax, they will probably have to reduce or take away their dividend. Who receives the dividend? Pensioners, through their pension funds, right? Investment has to be real, which is what I think Rishi will demand of all these companies, and to see a roadmap towards that investment. Well, we're not taking any options off the table. The important thing to remember is the 22 billion in the next 12 months is making a difference. So in April, the £150 council tax rebate went into people's accounts. In October, another £200 to bring down their electricity and utility bills. So just to go
back on the windfall tax, because it's quite interesting. You know, in January you spoke about the windfall tax, saying that it's never going to cut it. But it feels like perhaps if there are discounts available to encourage investment, your position could change. Is that a fair sort of summary of where you're at?
So I think, as I said to you, we have to be very careful and very sort of clear-eyed on this, that there is no zero-cost options, because if you have a windfall tax in the way Labour were proposing it, and I think they were proposing on 28 billion of borrowing.
But if there are perhaps things that would encourage investment, you would be prepared to look at it a bit more closely.
So we want to see their investment, but also just remember, it's pensioners who basically get the dividend from these companies, and if they're going to cut their dividend because they've had a windfall tax, then that'll make a difference to pensioners as well. So there are no easy options here, but the one thing we are determined to do is be on people's side on this.
On this, I just want to read you part of the Sunday Times story. They say that Downing Street is concerned that simply funding pain relief handouts to households struggling to pay bills will quickly be forgotten by voters. Instead, they want billions of pounds diverted to long-term surgery that will boost the economy for years to come. It sounds a little bit... This is obviously from the Sunday Times, but it sounds a bit dismissive, doesn't it? Pain relief handouts, because these are people who perhaps wouldn't vote for the Conservatives anyway. Those pain relief handouts could make a real difference to people really struggling, couldn't they?
Well, first of all, no one I have heard speaks in this way to that report in the Sunday Times, so I don't recognise that. Secondly, what Rishi has done is to effectively deliver 22 billion in 12 months of help. If you look at what we're doing in July, there is a tax cut, because we're raising the national insurance threshold for 34 million people. 34 million people will get £330 more per annum because of that change. What we've done for those who are really struggling, those on universal credit, is the taper increase means they have an extra £1,000.
The rise in, as you know, the rise in universal credit is far, far below the rise of inflation at a 40-year high. It's very difficult for those families.
But take the taper, that's £1,000, and then on top of that, the rise in the national living wage is another £1,000. That's £2,000 of help that's gone in. Local government, councils know which families, I can tell you from my own local authority, that are really struggling with the weekly shop, with the utility bills. We've increased the amount of help to £1 billion, and that money's getting out the door now. But of course, Rishi will keep looking at this. We will see more data coming through. We are in a global battle against inflation. You know that because you see it in America. You're seeing it in Europe, right? And when he finds the best way to target the help to those people who really need it, he will make an announcement, I'm certain of it.
And you think it will be before the summer?
Well, as I said, we keep an eye on this, and we're not complacent. That's why I worry about some of these reports, because I don't recognise this language. It sounds like people sort of talking about this in somehow, oh, well, we might need to do something. No, we are determined to be on people's side.
OK. If the government is to increase support, you need to find savings. Some pretty hefty cuts to the civil service on the way. Is it true that you've modelled cuts of up to 40% in your own department?
So we're looking at everything. In my settlement, in the spending
is that
review,
true about modelling cuts?
So we will look at all options. The important thing to remember...
So, yes...
Now, hear me out, because it's important, because, these are people's lives, right? I've got great civil servants who are doing great work in my department on my 3 priorities, on skills. T-levels will be as famous as A-levels, right? On schools, every child to be in a great school, wherever they live in the country with a great teacher. And on families, we're building family hubs in half of England's local authorities. I need my people to basically be focusing on my priorities. So the way we shape the department, I've got 8,000 people. We're going to drop to about 7,150, because that's part of what we've done in the spending review settlement. It's about an 11 to 12% decrease already. But we'll look at where else we can make savings across government, because actually we are servicing a debt today. The debt servicing is £83 billion a year. Last year, it used to be 20 billion. This is where you've got to ask Labour, who's going to come on next.
Which I will.
Where are they going to borrow from? They say they're going to borrow another 28 billion. Right?
I'll be talking to Labour later. Just is the 40% figure accurate?
So we're looking to model 10%. We're above that already. 20%, 30%, 40%. We will model across that. The thing to be aware of is, my focus is to deliver outcomes. What your viewers want is, by the end of this Parliament, I've delivered a great school in every constituency, for every child, at the right time, at the right place for them. I've delivered on the skills agenda, big skills agenda. We're going to stand behind every adult if they want to retrain or reskill any time in their life. £37,000 of investment. They can pull it off as a whole or in modules in the lifelong learning entitlement. But what I'm saying to you is, I've got to shape my department, my people, right, to deliver those things. I can't go to a place where I would actually impact delivery. That's my message to my team and, of course, to the nation, ultimately. Now,
you gave an interview to The Times last week that you said Britain should be very proud of its private schools, and that Oxford and Cambridge admission should be based on merit and evidence rather than tilting the system away from children who are performing. So do you think there's a risk that the system is being tilted away from private school pupils?
So let me explain that.
Yeah.
What is merit? If there are 2 students, one has gone to my brilliant state schools and they're getting better every day, and one has gone to an independent school and they get the same set of results at A-levels, then actually the university should take the boy from the state school. Why? Because he's had greater challenges to overcome to get the same results. What I don't think you do, you don't level up by dragging people down. Our independent sector, you look at what King Edward's School Foundation is doing in Birmingham, where they actually run independent schools and state schools in one foundation. What Eton is planning to do with the Star Academies, where they're going to build 3 sixth form colleges in places like Oldham, in West Midlands, in the areas that need that investment in education. I want to bring everybody together, right? You don't succeed by delivering a great outcome for every child by actually attacking a part of the system. I don't want to attack independent schools. They do a great job. They're joining us on this journey. Magdalen School in Oxford is already looking at where they can partner with their local authority and form a trust. That's a great thing. Let's celebrate that.
You're talking about merit. And
Yes.
I guess the problem that some people would argue is that because so many private school pupils go to the top universities, that isn't on merit. And actually, the landmark report, the 2014 report, analysing 132,000 students over 3 years, saying that state schools with the same results much more likely to gain a 2-1 or a first degree. So a boy who gets BBB at state school was just as likely to get a 2-1 or a first as a private school boy with ABB. So tilting the system, some would say, actually, that is fair.
No, I tell you what's fair, is I have to hold myself and my team and the front line to say, we can do as well, right? We can. I've already seen it. I've evidenced it in my white paper. There are great families of schools in high-performing multi-academy trusts around the country. I went to Catmo's Trust in Rutland the other day. Right, they deliver great results.
You still sent your children to private school, though?
I hear that was a parental decision. I have to make that with my wife. I don't make that on my own. And I say to you, we have great independent schools. They're joining us on this journey to create real improvement for all of our children. But the way you do that is by improving the state system. Look at what Catherine Bilba-Singh is doing with Michaela. She's got a fantastic, by the way, programme tonight on ITV. I know it's a different channel, but people should watch what Catherine's been able to do, right? Look at Catmo's Multi-Academy Trust. Look at Dixon's Star Academy. The brilliant Phil Harris and what he's done with Harris Academies, right? And smaller schools, Hammersmith Academy, a single academy trust with Gary Kynaston, delivering great outcomes. He's got 60% pupil premium, yet he stretches every child to the best of their ability and knows that there is no glass ceiling. You smash through it and you get to Oxbridge, you get to Russell Group, you get to other universities, or you do an apprenticeship. You do a T-level and a degree apprenticeship. We now are building many, many runways for people's careers to take off on, not just the traditional runway. That's a good thing. And everyone's joining that journey, including independent schools. Let's celebrate that.
I've just got one question to squeeze in before I let you go. I'm not sure if you're aware of the story of Raheem Bailey. This is an 11-year-old boy who lost his finger when he was fleeing from racist bullies, allegedly. He was beaten, kicked, pushed to the ground, allegedly. His finger was then amputated after it was caught in a fence when he was trying to run away. I just want to get your reaction to that story and if we're doing enough to tackle racist bullying.
It's sickening. We always need to do more. I suffered bullying when I first arrived on these shores. I couldn't speak English, and it was hard. And you know, I remember my first experience at my first school was Holland Park School, being chased around the park as a sort of entertainment for bigger boys, and then throwing me in the pond or dunking me head down in the pond. Pretty horrific for a child who's just arrived on these shores.
And you think that was a racist element to that?
Well, I don't know. It was a long time ago, but I've certainly been at the receiving end of other racist, you know, slurs, words, whatever. You know, I was called a Paki at school. I had to explain that if they mean I'm from Pakistan, I'm not from Pakistan. I'm actually from a place called Iraq, and I'm Kurdish of origin. It's called Kurdistan. It's a horrible thing, and I am determined to stamp it out, as I am determined to stamp out anti-Semitism in our schools or in our universities. There's no place for racism anywhere in our society, let alone in education.
Thank you for sharing your personal story. I'm sure that there'll be lots of little boys and girls who will find it quite, you know, inspiring to hear of someone overcoming that. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Nadhim Zahawi, there, the Education Secretary. Now, inflation is at 9%, as we were just discussing with our previous guest. It's a 40-year high, and of course that is putting some real pressure on family budgets. Labour says that thank you to that rising inflation, the average family is almost £500 worse off since the Chancellor's spring statement. So, what do they intend to do about it? Let's try and find out. We're joined now by the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. So let's just start off with that research, shall we? You've been looking at the impact of inflation on families. How concerned are you?
Well, we're very concerned. This is the biggest issue facing people right now. It's driven in large part by the increase in energy bills, which is really driving inflation up. But we've also got inflation across the board on food bills, other costs for industry and so on. And it's really, really tough for families out there now, and people are having to make some very, very difficult choices.
So what would Labour do to tackle inflation?
Well, you need a short-term plan and a long-term plan. And in the short term, we've got to get help to people. particularly with energy bills. So we've advocated this policy of a windfall levy on the excess profits of the oil and gas companies who are making the most out of the current energy price inflation, and together with other measures, using that to get more help to people with energy bills, particularly those at the lower end of the income scale who spend a greater proportion of their income on energy than better off families.
And what's the long-term plan?
The long-term plan is we've got to improve the country's economic growth record. We're in this spiral of difficult choices around tax and spend because we've had poor economic growth for 10 or 12 years now. So we've got to get our growth record up in the future in order to make the country more prosperous and the people living in it more prosperous. Let me explain what that means.
Yeah, how do you do that? I mean, like, better growth sounds great, doesn't it? I think everyone would agree with that, but how do you do it?
Well, you need a number of things. First of all, you were talking to Nadhim Zahawi about skill levels, for example. We've still got 200,000 children living in areas where there are no good or outstanding schools. The government's actually having a debate with themselves about sending not enough people, sending too many people to university.
At the same time,
you've got to get your skill levels up.
The question was, how would Labour tackle inflation? The windfall tax, obviously, is something that we've talked about. Every interview I talk about Labour frontbenchers, it's windfall tax. But then leaping towards schools as a way of tackling inflation, it feels
it's not about tackling inflation. It's a contributor to long-term growth, the skills of your people. Also, for example, the green transition that we've got to make, that can be a contributor to long-term economic growth. If we get it right, we match the technology, the capacity to make things here. You need a short-term plan at the moment to help people with the cost of living crisis, and you need a long-term plan geared at the country's prosperity.
I guess I'm, trying to work out a bit more about the policy platform that Labour has. I understand the windfall tax. It's something that clearly, you can see government thinking about as well. But it does feel like every time I talk to Labour, all we talk about is the windfall tax. And the crisis is real. As you say, inflation at a 40-year high. You want an emergency budget. You need something else in it other than a windfall tax, don't you?
Let me give you another example. If you take the costs for business, which are a real part of this right now, we've advocated more help for business rate relief, paid for by increasing the digital services tax for this year in order to get business rate relief to a greater range of businesses. That could take up to £5,700 off business rate bills for some small and medium-sized businesses, because inflation, yes, it's about consumers, but it's also about cost for business too. So that's another plank of our policy platform alongside the windfall levy.
Just talking about how you pay for the policy platform as well. So the windfall tax raises around £2 billion a year on the sort of latest figures. You also want to, spend £28 billion a year on the sort of green plans, tackling climate change. You want to increase defence spending. You've spoken out against the rise in national insurance. How are you going to pay for all this? Would Labour be putting up borrowing?
Well, let me take the green plan that you just quoted. Look at the scale of what we've got to do over the next 10 or 20 years. There are 30 million cars on the road.
But I'm not asking about the right or wrong of the policy. I'm asking about how it would be paid for. It would be paid for by more borrowing, wouldn't it?
That is a borrowing plan. It's borrowing for investment, and the government's already doing this.
At a time of rising interest rates, is that a good idea?
The government has already issued £16 billion of green gilts for precisely this purpose. Governments in Poland, Germany, France, all issuing green gilts. That is our policy to borrow in the markets, to invest in this transition. And if we don't do that, if we abandon green gilts, for example, so we're not going to do any of that, what we'd be doing is leaving greater cost to the next generation, because the longer you leave this transition, the more expensive it will be. And also, it will be unfair to consumers. If you take these heat pumps right now, for example, cost a lot more than a gas boiler. For my constituents, this transition has to be fair. It can't just be a transition for the rich. So this requires a partnership between government and industry to make sure that Britain gets the best advantage out of it, and also to make sure it's done in a fair way.
Have you modelled the cost of the rising interest rates on this?
Look, we always have an eye on everything, but green gilts are already part of the policy mix. We want to use them to make sure we get this transition done in a fair way.
OK. OK. Now, I just want to have a look at a piece that you wrote for The Times back in March 2020. Now, this was at the time of the leadership contest to replace Jeremy Corbyn. And this is what you said. I think it's quite... OK, that is not the quote I was hoping for. So the quote says, after Labour lost its third election in a row in 1987, Neil Kinnock launched a no-holds-barred policy review in which everything was on the table, including the sacred cows such as support for unilateral nuclear disarmament. He did that because he knew that fundamental change was necessary if Labour was to win again. And then he went on to say, after a shattering defeat, the key question is direction. It means having a policy platform that looks to the future. I just wonder if you feel like that, genuine, no-holds-barred policy review has happened under Keir Starmer.
Well, I've always been clear that leadership wasn't just about a change of personnel. It had to be a change of direction too. When you lost 4 elections in a row, you can't just go back with the same policy platform and a person in a different suit and expect the electorate to take a different attitude. So I'm very much in favour of root and branch examination of things. But if you take the green...
Do you think that's happened, that root and branch?
If you take the example we've been discussing this morning on the green agenda, there I think you've got an ambitious programme for a transition that's going to happen anyway. But I want us to be hungry for change in every area, in education policy, in health policy, learning the lessons of the COVID experience. What can we do better in the future?
Do you think you've been radical enough in providing that opposition?
Well, we'll only know the answer.
We
will only know the answer to that when we come to the next election. But I think there is a hunger for change in the Labour Party now.
It feels like you'd like to go a bit further.
We've always got further to go because when you've had such an emphatic defeat as the one that we had in 2019, the worst thing you could do is to think one more heave was going to do it for you. One more heave won't do it for us. We've got a new leader, but we also need a new direction too.
Interesting. And you don't think that new direction has come yet?
Well, we're part of the way through, and we've got some time to go before the next election. But I'm confident that we'll have an exciting and responsible programme when it comes to that poll.
We spoke to Nadhim Zahawi earlier about the meeting between Sue Gray and Boris Johnson. He couldn't tell us who called that meeting. Are you concerned about the fact that Sue Gray, the civil servant leading the investigation into Partygate, met with the Prime Minister?
I've got every faith in Sue Gray's integrity. She is a civil servant of the highest integrity. We don't know the details of that meeting. It's not clear who called it. There's different accounts of that, so it's hard for me to say what was said there. But I do have faith in her integrity, and let's see what she says when the report comes out.
OK. I mean, it does feel, after the Met have concluded their investigation, no more fines for Boris Johnson, that actually the person who's come out of this with their future more uncertain is actually Keir Starmer, because he's said, of course, that he will resign if he's found to have breached the law with the investigation that's going on by Durham Police. Given the unpredictability of these fines, was that gamble really such a great idea?
Look, I think the statement he made the other week showed real integrity and leadership. He's the former Director of Public Prosecutions. He takes adherence to the law extremely seriously. And if you contrast that to the culture that's been exposed both by what the Met's uncovered and by what we're likely to see in Sue Gray's report, you see that culture comes from the top.
Isn't this almost, the point? Why has Keir Starmer put his future on the line in a way that he perhaps didn't need to?
Keir Starmer holds public service and the standards of public service extremely highly. He doesn't believe this notion that, well, they're all the same, no scandal matters, no shame matters, you can get away with anything. There's a real contrast in standards between what he's said and the way he's conducted himself through this. Remember, this is someone who isolated 4 or 5 times, I think, when having COVID or family members have. He's taken adherence to the rules extremely seriously.
OK.
And he's contrasting that with the culture that's been exposed in Number 10.
OK. It feels like it has sparked a bit of an informal leadership contest, though, doesn't it? We've got pages like the Financial Times doing interviews with Wes Streeting, framing them about whether or not he's the saviour of the Labour Party. Is Wes Streeting the saviour Labour desperately needs? Lisa Nandy and Bridget Phillipson haven't ruled out a run when they've done interviews. I mean, this is not helpful, is it?
Well, look, I'm very confident in Keir Starmer's leadership, but it's also really encouraging for me to see so many other talented people in the Labour Party. Their time is not yet. Maybe it will be one day in the future.
OK, thank you very much, Pat McFadden, there from the Labour Party. Well, from domestic politics, we can turn to Ukraine now, because President Zelensky says only a negotiated settlement can end the war in his country. The final stand in Mariupol seems to have been defeated, and Russian forces have intensified their attacks in the south and east of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the US has authorised $40 billion of aid to Ukraine, half of it to military supplies, as the war looks to continue for some time yet. We can hear from Ukraine now and speak to the Ukrainian MP, Lisa Yasko. Thank you so much for being with us today. Can you just explain to us what the situation on the ground is like where you are?
Good morning. Well, I'm currently traveling to Davos World Economic Forum, but the situation in Ukraine is still very sad. It's already 3 months of the war and people are very desperate. The fighting mood is still very, very high. But the traumas and traumatized situations that we all got from all of that are only increasing. Many people lost their jobs. The economic situation is very hard. Of course, many lost their relatives, their friends, and it's going on. And the news that we've heard today that Russia, for example, is using 2/3 of its military submarines right now with the rockets. They are right now in the sea is very warning. And it's very sad that we all got used to the fact that there are sirenes and the warnings, the air warnings every day. And many people see their normal life as with these sounds, but it's not normal and we need to change that.
We've seen a situation where the Russians have finally taken Mariupol after that extraordinary defence that was waged there, including at the steelworks. But now, of course, it means they can really focus their attention on the east and in the Donbass region. How is the fighting there?
It's very harsh and tough. For many people, it's very hard to get any connection with their sons, with their brothers or their husbands who are fighting there right now in our military. There is almost no connection. Still, there is like thousands of people who are under attack on everyday basis, without food, without water. Many are taken forcefully to Russia. We know that the forced migration is taking place and the children are kidnapped, women are raped. Unfortunately, the situation didn't become better and it actually got worse because now we know more about the numbers. So now we understand that it's a matter of our persistence and our fighting mood, and there is no way back. We need to win it all. We need to have peace there, and we need to have our territories back, and we need your help. The help of the international community, of course, to make it happen.
That's interesting. Just to clarify then, the Ukrainian position still that there'll be no territory given up to Russia.
We're not going to give any territory to Russia. That there cannot be any compromise on that, especially with that thousands of numbers of victims that we currently have of civilians and the military and our army. We're not going to forgive this, and it's not even in the discussion.
Okay. And what is the status of Crimea in that discussion?
Well, we believe that we can bring Crimea back, and our victory will only depend when all our territories will be back, because now Putin is completely in a crazy mood, and we understand that he is using all his force to destroy Ukraine. And for us, it's a very existential question. We need to have our territories back because we already paid very high price for it, and we will go till the end to have our territories back.
Do you think this is a war that you can win, given the size of the Russian military?
Well, I think in the war it's very hard to win because there are always victims and something that you lose, and it's very painful. And that's something that we'll remember for maybe like hundreds of years in the future. But of course, talking about our freedom and our peace and our territory, there is no other way, just the victory, because we are not going to be slaves. It's not acceptable for us. We are a very freedom-loving nation, and we will go till the end, till the full victory with this.
Wow. And what help do you need from the international community? You spoke a little bit earlier in the interview about needing more.
Well, of course, it's about military assistance and it's about economic assistance right now. And we need more and more sanctions on Russia to isolate Russia so that Russia gets less money to finance its war crimes in Ukraine. And we need it very, very quickly. Because as we see, 3 months have already passed and we could stop it much earlier, but Russia still has resources to have war in Ukraine. We need to do everything possible to make sure that Russia doesn't have resources for that anymore.
You talked about those resources, and of course, a lot of them come from the sale of oil and gas, particularly to countries in Europe, don't they?
Exactly. And it's very sad when we still have some dialogues with some European countries discussing oil and gas embargo while we are losing lives of people every day. And someone is scared to lose some money from that. But we are sure that the business as usual is not acceptable anymore. The world is different right now, and it's a matter of time only when we will have the new reality. And one more thing that is very important, we need to change the international order. I'm now talking about the international organizations and the tools that we may have to stop the war and to have peace in the future. United Nations, Council of Europe, other organizations, they need to have real tools, not just on paper, but real tools that will ensure that we will not have war in Ukraine or in other European countries in the future anymore.
Now, women and girls are so often, the victims of war, and we've certainly seen that in Ukraine. And if I'm being honest, some of the stories about, the rape and the treatment of children as well coming out of your country have been some of the hardest that I've ever covered as a journalist, with no doubt. It's very tempting to look the other way, but it does feel like we have to bear witness. Can you share any of the individual stories that you've heard since this war, just to give our viewers a bit of a sense of what is happening?
Well, one of my colleagues lost her husband and they have 2 children. He was killed. I also know people who are in Kyiv Oblast, who were living in Kyiv Oblast and who were raped and currently are pregnant or are with very strong psychological traumas. But the numbers of these people are thousands. And I know that the hotline receives lots of calls every day from people who are in need. But even those who didn't suffer so much, we all need that, because life for us is completely different. For me, for example, it's very hard to have any happy moments, because every second I know that there is a war in my country and I cannot afford having any positive moments. But what to do with those who, for example, were raped in front of the eyes of their children, or they lost their children, and we know that there is a real nightmare of that war crimes that were happening, because the rapes were happening not only to women but also to children and to elderly, and simultaneously. And I have no idea who are those people who were raised this way, who were thinking that raping this way, so widespread, is normal. Can you imagine what is happening in the brain of these people? And it's a big tragedy and big question that I believe we need to address as international community. How did it happen? There are so many people in Russia, in the Russian society, who think that using violence is okay. It's a great danger.
It's absolutely unbelievable, as you say. You mentioned there about knowing people who are pregnant after rape. How concerned are you that Poland has got such restrictive abortion laws when obviously so many millions of Ukrainian women are going to Poland?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a big problem because we know that abortion is banned in Poland, and it's an additional big problem for Ukrainian women. But I know that there is assistance provided also from other countries, and it's a process. It's not going that smoothly, but I know that there is lots of assistance that is on the way and is provided to people who are in need, including this kind of assistance with the need of medical care and those who are unfortunately suffering from rape. But it needs time. It cannot be fixed in one day, and it's incredibly dramatic and sad for all of us.
Thank you so much for talking so powerfully to us this morning. It's such a privilege to get to speak to people like you. And also, you said that you can't feel happy anymore, and I really hope that, in the future that does change.
Thank you.
Always some of the most powerful interviews that we do on this programme coming out of Ukraine. Now, our next interview is the longest-serving health secretary, or he was when he handed over to Matt Hancock in 2018. That was around 16 months before COVID hit. And when Jeremy Hunt stepped down from frontbench politics, he said he wanted to do for patient safety what Al Gore did for climate change. In a new book, he's called for fundamental culture change in the NHS to prevent avoidable deaths. And with questions over Boris Johnson's future, he's never ruled out another run for the Conservative leadership either. Let's have a little listen to what happened when we spoke to Jeremy Hunt earlier this week. I started by asking about the NHS.
Well, I think it can be a rogue system from the point of view of families when something goes wrong, and sometimes they feel the shutters come down and no one wants to meet them and explain why a loved one's died. But I also think it's important to say that the vast majority of NHS care is absolutely brilliant. I've got 3 lovely children, all born on the NHS. It mended my elbow last year when I broke it, brilliant surgeon and physio. But the question is, when things do go wrong, as they do in all health systems, how good are we at learning from mistakes? And what I found writing this book is that the one thing the families want when something goes wrong is never money. It's just to feel that the loss of their loved one has some meaning because the system's learned from what went wrong and isn't going to make the same mistake again.
And I guess that's the critical point, isn't it? Not making the same mistake again. Do you feel that the shutters coming down, as you say it, has effectively led to more avoidable deaths?
Yes, and when I was writing this book, I came to realise this is not just a problem in the NHS. It's a problem in healthcare systems all over the world. But if you think about the most traumatic thing that could happen in a hospital, which is perhaps a baby dying, that is equally traumatic for the doctors and nurses and midwives as it is for the family. And they have to come into work the next day and carry on looking after other patients. And they want to do nothing more than be open and transparent and learn the lessons. The system can make that impossible. They are worried, frankly, they'll get fired if they are open about having made a mistake, but then they're thinking about, what are their bosses in the NHS going to do, the regulators, what are they going to say, are they going to get struck off the register? And the result of that is that the one thing that matters more than anything else, which is that lessons are learned, is the thing that often doesn't happen because of this terrible blame culture.
You speak a little bit as if you weren't health secretary. You were the longest-serving health secretary. A lot of people would be thinking, why haven't you done something about it?
Well, I try to be honest in this book about where I did make progress and where I failed to make progress. I think in terms of transparency and openness, we are in a better place. 3 million more patients were using good or outstanding hospitals by the end of my time compared to when I started. But there were also things I didn't fix. I didn't put in place a long-term plan for the social care system. And when you hear stories, as we've been hearing this week, about people waiting an hour for an ambulance when they have a stroke, a lot of the reason for that is because hospitals can't discharge people into the social care system and they get full. And so there were things that I wish I had made more progress on.
Do you think Boris Johnson should be making more progress on social care as well? I remember it's one of the things that he obviously spoke about when he first became Prime Minister, and yet it doesn't feel like much has happened.
Yes, I think he has made some progress. The cap on care costs is being introduced, and that will be a big relief to people who have neurological conditions like dementia. But the core funding for local authorities is still not where it needs to be.
You know, one of the stories that I found most shocking recently is the Shrewsbury and Telford Trust, which the report, of course, found that more than 200 babies and 9 mothers died unnecessarily because of failings in that trust, catastrophic failings in that trust. We also know, of course, that women who aren't white are 5 times more likely to die during pregnancy. Is the maternity care system in the UK fit for purpose?
The vast majority of births are totally safe, but we can do better. If we had the same maternity safety rates as Sweden, 1,000 more babies would live every year in England.
And why? What's going wrong? Is it funding for midwives? What is it? Is it attitudes?
Well, my select committee did a report into this last year, and Donna Ockenden did a report into Shrewsbury and Telford more recently, and we both said the same thing, which is, number one, we need more midwives and more doctors, at least 2,000 more midwives, at least 500 more doctors and nurses and other people. The government's accepted that recommendation. The second thing, though, is...
Have you seen any progress on that, or have they just said that they accept it?
Not yet. What we've heard is the government accepting the recommendation, but they haven't said when they will recruit those extra midwives.
How long ago was it that you called for it, then?
We called for it last summer.
And nothing's happened.
And we need to make progress urgently, because we need every mum to know that if they are going into a maternity unit, there isn't going to be a shortage of midwives or doctors, so it is absolutely essential to act quickly.
Do you think that if men gave birth, the system would work better?
It's a good question. I think there are blind spots when it comes to women's illnesses.
Talking about women's health, there have been reports coming from the US that Roe versus Wade will be overturned. Now, you've personally said before that you think the abortion limit should be reduced to 12 weeks, although you have said that it's not a law that you would introduce if you would be Prime Minister. It's just a personal opinion of yours. What's your reaction to Roe versus Wade?
Well, I'm totally against it. Let me be clear. I'm a supporter of the system in Holland, which has no restrictions on early stage abortions, and then they get progressively higher as the pregnancy continues. So that's the system that but it's a personal view, and it's a matter of a free vote, and I always said in government positions this is not something for me to pursue. I'd be extremely worried if in the United States we ended up with a situation where women couldn't access basic health rights.
There's obviously been a huge pressure on the NHS recently through COVID, staff absences, treatments being delayed. If there is a spike in cases in the winter, are you worried about the preparedness of the NHS?
I'm always worried about the capacity of the NHS. If there was one thing that I wish I'd known at the start of my quite long time as Health Secretary, it is that you can't solve problems with money alone. Money matters, but there is a big and legitimate debate about funding for the NHS and care system. But you can't put £3 billion into the system and expect to see change unless there are £3 billion worth of extra doctors and nurses and beds to use.
For many families, things are really, really difficult. The government talks about the support that it's already put in, but do you feel that more needs to be done to help those, particularly on the lowest incomes?
I think the government is doing a lot. I mean, the sums of money in terms of billions of pounds, which of course come from taxpayers ultimately, are huge. But the core problem is that inflation is at record levels, and that is just eating away at family finances. And we heard the figures this week that the inflation rate is even higher for the poorest families. So I think the heart of the issue is how do we bring down the inflation rate? Personally, I'd be very attracted to things that reduce people's fuel bills, because that helps people on low incomes, but also brings down the inflation rate.
Some of your colleagues have talked about help on universal credit. Obviously, there was a £20 uplift during the pandemic. Is that the kind of thing you'd like to see targeted at the people on lower incomes?
I wouldn't like to second-guess the Chancellor on the precise measures, but I do think targeting help is the most important thing.
Do you like the idea of a windfall tax?
Let me say this, I'm pleased that the Chancellor has said all options are on the table, because I find it very difficult to justify BP buying back £2.5 billion of shares because of a hike in the oil price.
Do you think it's inevitable that the government's going to U-turn on this?
I think that we are hearing signs that all options are on the table, and so we need to watch this space.
It feels like it's something that you would be quite attracted to.
Personally, I find it very difficult to justify those extra profits.
The Met Police have concluded their investigation into Partygate, 126 fines for 8 gatherings. Should Boris Johnson have done the same as Keir Starmer and to have pledged to resign if he's found guilty of a criminal offence?
I wouldn't want to minimise the anger people feel about the fact that people in Downing Street did not follow the rules that they set for other people. But I think that the anger that the electorate feel, the way that my party suffered in the local elections, is about more than that. I think the fundamental problems in the economy, high inflation, low growth, are something that are worrying a lot of families. I don't think the next election will be about Partygate. I think it will be fought on which party has the best long-term plans for the economy, for the NHS, where I hope my book will make a contribution.
At the same time, I've spoken to Conservative MPs who said that Partygate came up an awful lot on the doorstep at those local elections, because I guess it's about what people feel is the character of the Prime Minister as well.
I think there are some voters who were extremely angry, and there were some Conservative voters who were extremely angry. But I think those same voters also look at the situation in the world, look at what's happening in Ukraine, and see that what's going wrong there is of a scale with a totally different magnitude. I personally don't believe we should have a change in Prime Minister right now. Britain has been the most robust member of the Western Alliance. And I think the only person who would be pleased if we had a hiatus of several months in the leadership of the UK would be Vladimir Putin. That doesn't mean to say that I don't recognise the anger that a lot of people feel.
Do you think there's been a bit of a complacency after the local election results? Because they were pretty bad for your party, particularly in the south.
Let me put it this way. I think it would be wrong to say this is just midterm blues. I think the core reasons that people vote Conservative, which is the prospect of strong economic growth, the prospect of lower taxes, these things are not true at the moment, and people are really worried about the inflation level, the very low growth rates. I'm worried about it because I want us to be able to fund the NHS, spend more on defence, and offer the prospect of lower taxes. And the only way you can do all those things is by getting growth into the economy.
I'm not going to ask the typical if the ball came loose at the back of the scrum question, because frankly we actually do know the answer to it. You haven't ruled out another crack at the leadership. You said earlier this year that your ambition hasn't completely vanished. Why do you think you would be good at the top job?
It's a very good way of asking the same question, Sophie. Full marks for trying. I've been very honest that I don't rule back a return to frontline politics. My ambition has ebbed somewhat since stepping back because I've loved being with my family. I know it's a terrible cliche when politicians say that, but it is actually true in my case.
But not disappeared, is that?
It hasn't disappeared, but I don't think now is the moment for a change in Prime Minister. For the reason I mentioned, I think something that makes Vladimir Putin happy is precisely what we don't want at this moment, when we have the first European war in our lifetimes, the risk of chemical and biological and even nuclear weapons being used. The reports that you send back from places like Mariupol, I think, do give us a perspective, and Britain's role in the Western Alliance, contrary to what many people thought, has been extremely important, very robust, and it's what we need to see now.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jeremy Hunt there. And there'll be lots more about the state of play here in Westminster on our midweek programme. That's The Take with Sophy Ridge, so you get more from me. That's every Wednesday evening at 9 p.m. It's a chance for us to take the political temperature at midweek, some interviews, a bit of reacting to Prime Minister's questions as well. And we'll also be talking to our viewers panel just to try and get a bit of a sense of how the public is reacting to the biggest political stories of the week. So, yeah, lots of fun. The Take, that is Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Do join us on Sky News. You're watching Sophy Ridge on Sunday. After the break, we will be watching my interview with Lucy Shtein of Pussy Riot. You don't want to miss that one.
con eso ya podemos ir evaluando entonces cómo el cambio climático va a afectar estos ecosistemas. Y eso cómo afecta prácticamente toda la cadena, o sea, si afectamos a los productores primarios, que son las microalgas, vamos a ver afectado obviamente todo el resto de los organismos.
Hello, welcome back to Sophy Ridge on Sunday. Now, in late March, the Pussy Riot activist Lucy Shtein put on a bright green food delivery uniform and she slipped out of her small Moscow flat. She'd been under house arrest there for more than a year as a long-time critic of the Putin regime that she'd been detained for a protest calling for opposition leader Alexei Navalny's release. Now, her girlfriend and fellow activist escaped similar charges, and the country and the pair are now reunited and performing in Europe to raise funds for Ukrainian refugees. I spoke to her about her nerve-wracking journey and a very special travelling companion. You escaped from Moscow in March after being under house arrest for over a year. Can you just explain why you were under house arrest?
I was under house arrest for the criminal case. It was like about so-called breaking COVID rules, but actually it was because of the protest rally. We participated to support Alexei Navalny, who was imprisoned after he was poisoned. It was a criminal case for 10 people. We were sent under house arrest for like half of a year. And after it, we were sentenced for the restriction of freedom. It's also like a house arrest.
So very difficult conditions to be living under. How did you manage to escape?
Firstly, it was a complete house arrest when I wasn't able to leave home anytime, but then it was like only a restriction for a night to leave apartments. So I had a daytime and I left house like in the morning, and When they found out that I'm not there at my place, I already was too far.
And you wore a disguise.
I had to wear this suit, food delivery costume, and so when I realized that I have to escape from Russia, I just used this costume again.
And how did you manage to get from Russia to Lithuania, which is where you are now?
It were 3 cars. First car in Russia, then second car to Belarus, and third car to Lithuania, actually. But I'm not sure that it's a good idea to talk about this way and method a lot, because I'm not the last person who have to leave Russia this way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're saying you're not the only person, of course, who's had to leave Russia. I think your girlfriend has also managed to escape.
Yeah, she did the same thing after me.
And so, Lucy, you escaped Russia with somebody. Who did you escape with?
Mr. Red. Say hello.
How did you escape with him?
I put him in my delivery food bag, and he was staying there during this trip.
And how was he during the trip? Was he okay?
Yeah, he's a strong red. I think he understood that we have to leave our home.
Why did you decide to make your escape in March? Was that because the situation had got more dangerous after the invasion of Ukraine?
First of all, I realized that if before I wanted to wait for the end of my sentence and be able to leave Russia legally and to come back to Russia legally, I changed my mind after the invasion to Ukraine, because I understood that I don't want to live there anymore, even if they would leave me alone and no jails, no arrest, no persecution. Even if I would be a free person in Russia, I just don't want to stay there anymore. If you're staying there or not even there, you just can't be silenced about what's happening. And if you can't, and if you call the war, it's also forbidden. You are risking to be in prison for 15 years.
So if you criticise the war in Ukraine, you could go to prison for 15 years now. That's the situation.
Yeah, even if you're just calling the war, because our government calls it special operation.
I think some people in the West don't understand why more people in Russia aren't protesting about Ukraine or aren't speaking out. Do you think that's because people support the war, or because people are too afraid about what would happen if they did speak out?
If Russian people would know the truth, they won't support the war, but not all of them, but I think a big part of them are just watching TV propaganda, and they don't know what's actually happening there, and they think that Ukrainians are Nazis and Russian soldiers are peacemakers.
Is it like being brainwashed?
Yeah, brainwashed.
Yeah.
It's a good word.
You're 25 years old. Mm-hmm. You've been under house arrest for a year. You had to flee your home. Mm-hmm. These are really big sacrifices for someone your age. You could have lived a much, much easier life. Why did you feel you had to do it?
if you live in Russia, you have to watch every day what's happening, and you just feel bad if you are silenced, and it's kind of it's for me it's this way. I just couldn't ignore it.
Even then, you had to speak out.
Yeah, and my mom yelled at me because stop it. Can you wait like several days, escape and post anything you want? But I couldn't, and it's even danger to make a repost about war criminal and about what happened in Bucha, for example.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it's been great to talk to you. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
At least she's down there, and I guess her mum at least will be pleased that she's doing that interview after escaping Russia and making it to Lithuania. Well, after the break, we're going to be turning our attention to Northern Ireland. We'll be speaking live to Naomi Long, the leader of the Alliance Party.
I'm Hannah Thomas-Peter, and I'm Sky's climate change correspondent. The UK is a world leader in wind power. Power! Power! People! It's part of the Congo Basin rainforest, which is such an important ecosystem. It's known as the lungs of Africa. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. She doesn't really enjoy speaking to the press, and it wasn't clear right up until the last moment that she was going to sit down with me.
I might be just very naive, but I do believe that change is possible, otherwise we wouldn't be climate activists.
I'm confident for the last 30 years we have known how bad it is. I'm not here to apologize, I'm here to fight for the next step.
You can see just the piles and piles of stuff, these sofas and people's desks and children's books. And you can see inside this home here, people trying to sort out their home. It's just been devastating.
I think everything's at stake. The future of our planet, the future of the beauty around us, the future of you and me.
It was everything that a journalist might want in a story.
A story that you'd be proud to have filmed.
But they didn't want journalists to see the real story.
It was very tiring, it was very sad, it was very scary at times.
Hey, there's no need for this.
But you have to keep going.
Oh, look at that.
You don't want to lecture people, but you do have to give them the facts.
The inspiration behind our product came from understanding how big of a problem livestock methane emissions were.
Hello, welcome back to Sophy Ridge on Sunday. Now, Sinn Féin made history recently when taking the most votes and the most seats in Northern Ireland's elections. But the Assembly is still deadlocked as the DUP demands changes to the protocol and the UK government rows with the European Union. But the non-sectarian Alliance Party was one of the biggest winners too. They more than doubled their seats with a big jump in votes, especially among young people. possibly pointing to a different future for Northern Irish politics. Well, the party says the Assembly must restart and they want to overhaul the entire power-sharing system. So let's speak now to the Alliance leader, Naomi Long, who is live in Belfast for us this morning. Thank you very much for being with us. You did very well in the recent Assembly elections. I just want to start by talking a little bit about what the Alliance Party stands for. What is it that you're about, and what in particular is your stance on the Good Friday Agreement?
Well, thank you, Sophie. And we have been fervent supporters of the Good Friday Agreement because from our inception 51 years ago, we were committed to power sharing and devolution locally as the best way to provide a stable future for the people of Northern Ireland, to allow people to self-govern and to create a society which was egalitarian and fair, because that was not the case prior to that point. And unfortunately, it's still not the case now. Alliance would describe itself as a liberal and progressive party, but also we are a pragmatic party and very keen to be able to continue to work to deliver improvements for people's lives, which is why the Assembly is so important.
At the same time, you want to see non-sectarian power sharing, which feels like it could be quite ambitious. Do you think it is really achievable?
Well, I think the alternative is the stop-go assembly that we have seen over the last 5 years, where for the majority of the time we haven't had functioning devolution. I don't believe that's sustainable. People in Northern Ireland are facing a cost of living crisis. They're concerned about the state of our health service, which is some of the longest waiting lists in the UK. And what they want is government to deliver change and to try to assist them with those issues. And instead, what they get is government which is held to ransom, sometimes by Sinn Féin, sometimes by the DUP, and a cycle of crisis and collapse. And the only way we can stop that happening is to remove the vetoes that those parties currently are able to exercise over the institutions and allow all votes in the Assembly to count for the same amount, because currently my vote doesn't count for the same amount as other colleagues because I won't designate as unionist or nationalist. And so we need to deal with this fundamental issue. The Good Friday Agreement provided us with a means of managing division in Northern Ireland. But society has changed, as the Good Friday Agreement intended it would, in the last 24 years. And so we now need to be open to changing the mechanisms and structures, not the principles of power sharing, not the idea that we have to share this place together and work together in order to deliver, but actually the mechanisms that are there, which currently are making the institutions more unstable. And that's what we would like to see happen, in order that when we come to these difficult issues, whether it's the protocol or whether it's something else, because there is always something else, that we're able to work through that rather than stop government until it's resolved.
You're talking about the sort of stop-start nature of government and Sinn Féin and the DUP being able to hold Northern Ireland to ransom. Do you think that is what the DUP is currently doing then, holding Northern Ireland to ransom by refusing to enter power sharing because of their concerns over the protocol? Or do you have a bit more sympathy with their position?
Well, I understand their position. I understand their lack of trust in the UK government, because I think at times the UK government have used Northern Ireland as a bit of a plaything when it comes to maintaining a grievance with Europe. They believe that for them electorally, for the Conservatives in England, this is a positive, and so they're willing to continue to have this constant grievance with the European Union, and Northern Ireland is, I suppose, a useful lever for them, but it's very damaging for community relations and for good governance in Northern Ireland. And so I do understand why the DUP lack trust in promises made by the UK government, but undoubtedly they're holding the people of Northern Ireland to ransom. I mean, Jeffrey Donaldson himself has said that he is using the position of being able to prevent government as leverage over the UK government. So, I mean, there's no question about that, and they've been openly admitting it. My problem is that it also holds the rest of us to ransom who want to get back to work, who want to start delivering for the people who elected us only 2 weeks ago, and who believe that there are powers that we have within the Assembly that can address the very immediate problems of fuel costs, of the cost of food and the cost of living in Northern Ireland, can start to deal with reform of our health service, which is urgent, particularly post-pandemic. And yet at the same time, we can negotiate around how the protocol could be improved, because I think all parties agree that certain changes would be beneficial to Northern Ireland businesses.
So what do you think needs to change about the protocol then?
Well, from our perspective, we are pragmatic about the protocol. It is Brexit that has ultimately caused the instability in Northern Ireland, as we knew it would. The whole purpose of the Good Friday Agreement was to diminish the importance of border issues and to make Northern Ireland function in a fairer way. And unfortunately, Brexit put borders and border friction back on the agenda. And that is very difficult for the very delicate ecology of Northern Ireland to deal with. The protocol was an attempt, albeit I would say a rather heavy-handed attempt, to deal with those border frictions and to ensure that there was still free flow across the border on the island of Ireland and no hard border established. But it did in the end lead to an additional level of friction in the Irish Sea. And I understand that for unionists, that is a very difficult situation, albeit for us, it was an inevitability and a consequence of Brexit. What we need to do now is build trust with the European Union. We're asking them essentially to devolve the protection of the single market to the UK, to allow us to have a green channel for goods coming from GB to Northern Ireland that won't go any further. But for them to do that, they need to trust the UK government will do what it says it's going to do. And of course, the history of the protocol is that they haven't done that. They've taken unilateral action and they've failed to keep the agreement that they negotiated and signed. So we were very clear when we met with the Prime Minister earlier this week that what we now need is for a negotiation between the UK and the EU to be taken seriously by the UK government, for them to live up to the deals that they make. And to work to build trust rather than take unilateral action, which will undermine that, because in doing so, we can minimise the impact of the protocol on businesses both in GB and in Northern Ireland, but still allow Northern Ireland to have the advantage that it has, which is free and unfettered access both into the EU single market for goods and into the UK single market for goods. And we need to exploit that in order to grow our economy in Northern Ireland.
I guess what the UK government would argue is that, yes, they signed up to the protocol, but they didn't envisage a situation where the EU would, in their view, implement it in a heavy-handed way. So effectively assuming that goods are going to be going on to the EU rather than staying in Northern Ireland. Do you have any sympathy with that position from the UK government?
None whatsoever, because before they signed the protocol, there is evidence that was presented to both the Prime Minister and indeed to Lord Frost, which set out very clearly what the implications of the protocol would be. You cannot negotiate a deal, see what that deal is going to do, sign up to that deal, sell it as a good deal, which is how the Prime Minister fought the elections, let's remember, and then say that you didn't fully understand what you'd signed up to. I mean, that is just an admission of failure on behalf of the government. I think the presumption has always been that the UK will behave in an exceptional manner and will be allowed to do so. And unfortunately, when we were part of the European Union, we set the rules for third countries, and now we are a third country. We need to learn to live by those rules, and it seems to be something that the government struggles with. I think most people will understand this is a very simple thing. When you make an agreement and when you give your word to do something, you ought to be at least prepared to do that thing before you do so. And I think when you don't, people will then trust you less and less on every subsequent occasion when you're asked to give your word on something. What we now need is to break that cycle. And actually get the UK government to deal with the EU, who are still, despite everything, willing to have these discussions and willing to try to accommodate what is in the best interest of Northern Ireland. And I think if we can get to a point where the UK government and the EU can set aside whatever issues they have, build that trust and get a set of protocols in place that will allow good governance. Because remember, we need, for business' sake, political stability, but also stability in terms of the arrangements going forward.
Thank you very much, Naomi Long there of the Alliance Party. Thank you for being on the programme today. Now, a quick reminder before we go, that our weekly podcast is available every week just after lunchtime. There'll be highlights of the interviews and some thoughts from the team there as well. You can find it wherever you can get your podcasts. Just search for Sophy Ridge on Sunday. Well, that is it for this week's Sophy Ridge on Sunday. Another busy week. Could we be seeing sight of the long-awaited Sue Gray report when we join you next week? It will be interesting to find out. And don't forget, of course, our Wednesday programme, 9 p.m. On Wednesday night, Sky News, The Take with Sophy Ridge. Do tune into that. And in the meantime, Thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
I'm Yvan Bourgnon, I'm a sailor. I spent half time of my life on the sea. We have a factory who can convert this plastic to energy. And so after, at the end, we can minimize the footprint carbon of the boat.